At my grandson's birthday party, my son-in-law's mother stood up and said, "Thanks to everyone who stood by us all these years, except for one old witch." And all eyes turned to me. I was stunned, but I just laughed and said, "This whole family, including you, relies on that old witch. Thank you to everyone who's been with us all these years," my son-in-law's mother declared, her voice cutting through the festive chatter at my grandson's birthday party. Then came the dagger. Except for one old witch. Every single eye in the room, it felt like swiveled to me. My breath hitched. Shock pure and hot surged through me. But then a strange defiant laugh bubbled up. "This entire family," I shot back, my voice surprisingly steady, "including you, depends on that old witch." And that's when I did something that finally made them see me, made them respect me. I'm 63 and I've learned to hear mechanical clocks tick. Not just tick, really. They speak. Over the years, you start to distinguish the voices of these small living mechanisms. Edward's pocket watch, my late husband's, always sounded special. There was a particular warmth to its ticking, maybe because he carried it in his breast pocket for 25 years, or because the brass case had warmed from his body, or maybe it was simply because it was his watch. I brought the magnifying glass closer to the mechanism, carefully turning a thin screwdriver. It was cold in the garage. Mid-October in Detroit is never warm. My fingers trembled slightly and I took a deep breath. You can't rush this kind of work. The rust had almost reached the balance, but if I scraped it off carefully, my cell phone vibrated on the workbench, shattering the silence. My daughter's number, of course. Who else would call on a Wednesday afternoon? "Yes, dear," I sighed, putting down my tools. "Mom, where are you? I've called you 3 times. Her voice was already laced with annoyance. "I'm at home working. Is something wrong? The garage has been my workshop, my sanctuary, since Edward passed. You promised to help me prepare for Finley's birthday. Did you forget?" I hadn't promised anything of the sort, but there was no point arguing. DRA demanded I come immediately. I carefully placed the watch parts in a special tray and covered the workbench with a clean cloth. My gaze swept over the garage wall, where my tools hung, each in its place, labeled and cleaned. A small kingdom of order, precision, consistency, attention to detail. I learned all of this at General Motors. For 25 years, I worked in industrial automation, setting up robotic systems on assembly lines. We worked with tolerances of thousandths of a millimeter. The reliability of every car depended on the accuracy of our settings. Now I was applying those skills to old watches, from pocket watches to grandfather clocks. The tiny mechanisms required the same care and understanding as industrial robots, only in miniature. The garage had long since been abandoned. Edward's old Ford used to be parked there, but I sold it 8 years ago after he died. Since then, the garage has been my workshop. It was the only place where I could be myself. Judith Harlow, a former industrial automation specialist, not just DRA's mom or Finley's grandma. Throwing on a worn jacket, I locked the garage and headed for the bus stop. It was a shame my old Chevrolet had broken down 2 weeks ago, and I didn't have enough money to repair it. I would have had to ask my daughter, and that would have meant another lecture about my financial insolvency. DRA and Garrett's house was in Grosse Pointe, a neighborhood where people were of a completely different caliber than me. It was over an hour away by public transportation, time that could have been spent on Edward's clock. On the bus, I took a small notebook with my calculations out of my bag. For the last 3 months, I had been saving money for new tools. If I didn't buy a new coat this winter, I could afford a precision screwdriver set. My daughter's house appeared at the end of the street, a 2-story house with a well-kept lawn and decorative bushes, so unlike my shabby little house in the old neighborhood. When I stepped onto the porch, the door swung open. DRA looked impeccable, even in her home clothes. "The house keys are on the table in the hall. The movers will be here in half an hour. Make sure they don't scratch the parquet in the living room." She gave me a critical look and added that I should change my clothes. She had left a suitable dress on the guest bed. I said nothing. Silence had become my survival strategy in this family. When DRA left, I walked through the empty house. Sometimes it amazed me how much stuff could fit into a home with so little life in it. Perfectly arranged furniture, decorative items that no one ever touched, magazines that no one read. I went upstairs and looked into my grandson's room. Finley was turning 13. He was a smart, observant teenager with a quiet voice and curious eyes, so reminiscent of Edward. The room was immaculate. Too immaculate for a 13-year-old boy. Designer wallpaper with a map of the world. A neatly made bed. Shelves with books that I'm sure were chosen not for the child's interests, but to create the right image. I sat down on the edge of the bed, remembering how I had recently helped Finley with his math homework. He was a quick learner, but he wasn't so much interested in solving abstract problems as he was in their practical application. "Grandma, how can you use this for mechanisms?" he would ask, and his eyes would light up with the same spark I had once seen in the mirror. Looking around, I noticed that one of the desk drawers was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pulled it out completely. Nothing special, notebooks, colored pencils, but something told me to look further. Crouching down, I looked under the bed. Nothing. I ran my hand along the bookcase and felt something hard. A small metal cookie tin. Inside were carefully organized tools and parts. A miniature battery-powered soldering iron, a set of thin screwdrivers, a multimeter, tweezers, spools of different colored wire, and several printed circuit boards. Underneath them were neatly drawn diagrams and drawings. I carefully took out one of the finished diagrams. It was an electronic alarm clock assembled on a breadboard with a small display and the ability to set different melodies. Next to it was another design, a simple robot on wheels with a mechanical arm capable of lifting light objects. Finley had equipped it with several sensors so that the robot could avoid obstacles. Everything was assembled neatly with an understanding of the basic principles of electronics. I smiled involuntarily. The boy had definitely inherited my love of technology. He didn't just copy diagrams from the internet, but tried to modify them, making his own small improvements. Perhaps it was the evenings when I told him about my work with industrial robots and how I set up automated systems that had an impact. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I quickly put the box back in its place and went downstairs. The movers brought tables and chairs for the party. The next 2 hours were spent in a flurry of activity. I directed the arrangement of the furniture and the unpacking of the dishes and decorations. The professional decorator hired by DRA looked down on me, but I didn't pay any attention. It wasn't the first time. Around 5 o'clock, DRA returned with a huge cake in the shape of a race car. Gareth followed her. A tall, fit man with premature gray hair and cold eyes. My son-in-law always treated me politely, but distantly, as if I were not his wife's mother, but some kind of relic he had to put up with. I went up to the guest's bedroom. On the bed lay a dark blue dress, strict, expensive, and completely not my style. Next to it were a pair of low-heeled shoes in my size. DRA always chose my clothes as if I were a mannequin that needed to be dressed appropriately for an exhibition. After changing, I went downstairs. Finley had already returned and was sitting in the kitchen silently watching his mother arrange the appetizers. "Hello, Grandma," he smiled. I noticed that the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hello, dear." I hugged him. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" "Not really," he shrugged. "Mom invited too many people. I don't even know most of them." When he went to get changed, I started helping set the table. Noticing that DRA was nearby, I decided to bring up Finley. "Diarra, I've noticed that Finley is interested in electronics. Maybe we should encourage that hobby." My daughter froze. "What are you talking about?" Her voice was tense. "I just think he has a talent for technology like you." DRA interrupted. "Mom, don't start. Finley needs to focus on his studies and sports. It's important for his future. Understanding technology can also be important for the future. The Simmons have different traditions," she snapped. "Gareth wants his son to go to a good school, then to the Ivy League like his father and grandfather." I said nothing again. When did my daughter become like this? When did she go from being a curious little girl, who used to collect radio sets with her father, to this cold woman, who valued status more than her own child's happiness? The doorbell rang. The first guest had arrived for the pre-party family dinner. DRA instantly transformed into a welcoming hostess, leaving me in the kitchen to finish the appetizers. Half an hour later, the house was filled with people. Gareth's parents, his sister and her husband, DRA's brother and his family. I tried to be helpful, serving drinks, clearing away used dishes, making sure everyone was comfortable. As usual, no one really noticed me. I was a piece of furniture, functional but unremarkable. "Lorraine will be here at 7, I heard Gareth say to his wife in the hallway. I froze. Lorraine, Gareth's mother, a woman I hadn't seen in years, but whose name still made me tremble inside. I backed into the kitchen, feeling my heart pounding in my throat. Lorraine Simmons. 20 years ago, she was the head of human resources at the General Motors plant where I worked. She was the one who signed my termination notice during downsizing, even though she knew my husband was sick and my daughter was in college. She was the one who looked me in the eye and talked about inevitable cutbacks, while other managers received bonuses for successful restructuring. Now she is my grandson's grandmother. Fate sometimes plays such tricks that you don't know whether to laugh or cry. I went to the far corner of the kitchen, pretending to be busy making coffee. After a while, I heard a deep, slightly hoarse female voice. Lorraine suggested that DRA discuss something important, and they went into Gareth's office. I exhaled. Not today. Please, not today. I wasn't ready to face Lorraine. Reaching for the cups in the top cupboard, I accidentally dropped one. The sound of broken porcelain was unexpectedly loud. I quickly began to gather the pieces, hoping no one would notice. Grandma, you cut yourself. Finley's quiet voice made me look up. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, watching me with serious eyes. Noticing the cut on my finger, he took a clean handkerchief out of his pocket. It's nothing, sweetie. I looked at my finger where a drop of blood had indeed appeared. It's just a little scratch. Finley came closer, holding out the handkerchief. Here, it's clean. I smiled, accepting his help. Thank you. How are you? Are you enjoying the preparations for your birthday? He shrugged. It's okay. It's not my birthday. It's their birthday. He nodded toward the living room. You'll be 13 tomorrow, Finley. It's an important day. Yeah. He sighed with unchildlike weariness. Grandma, you found my box, didn't you? I didn't deny it. Yes, I did. You're good at it. The robot is an interesting design. Where did you learn to solder? From videos on the internet. He glanced at the door. Don't tell Mom. Okay. She thinks it's a waste of time. I won't. I patted him on the shoulder. But it's not a waste of time, Finley. It's an important skill. Really? His eyes lit up. You used to work with stuff like that, right? Dad mentioned that you were an engineer. I was an industrial automation specialist. I nodded. I set up robotic systems at a factory. The principles are the same as in your projects. Precision, consistency, attention to detail. Cool, he exclaimed sincerely. Can you show me sometime how to make a robot's arm more precise? Right now, it often misses when it tries to pick something up. Sure, sweetie, if your parents say so. When Finley left, I finished cleaning up the shards and leaned against the kitchen table. Maybe all was not lost. Maybe there was still a spark in my grandson that DRA was so diligently trying to extinguish. Muffled voices came from Garrett's study. I wasn't going to eavesdrop, but I couldn't help stopping as I passed by. The house is on a nice lot, Lorraine was saying. The developer is offering a great price. It's the perfect location for new townhouses. But it's Mom's house. DRA's voice sounded uncertain. I can't just sell it. Honey, the house is technically yours. Edward left it to you. And what is your mother doing there? Living alone, spending money on fixing up junk. At her age, it's time to think about something more sensible, like a nursing home with good care. Mom would never agree. Who said you have to ask her? Lorraine's voice hardened. Gareth explained it to your wife. That house is an asset. It's foolish to keep it just out of sentimentality. Deara, your mother isn't young anymore, Gareth interjected. She's 63. Sooner or later, we'll have to decide how to take care of her. It's better to do it now while she's still relatively healthy. I recoiled from the door, feeling the blood drain from my face. They want to sell my house. The house where I've lived for 40 years. The house where DRA grew up. Where Edward died, where every corner holds memories. And my daughter isn't even trying to object. To her, I'm already written off. An old woman who needs to be sent to a nursing home. I hurried to the kitchen, feeling my hands tremble. I glanced at the clock. It was 6:45. Lorraine would be here soon, and I would have to smile. Pretend I didn't know she was preparing another blow for me. The doorbell rang again. More guests. I took a deep breath and tried to pull myself together. After all, it was Finley's birthday tomorrow. And no matter what happened, I wasn't going to ruin my grandson's birthday. Finley's birthday was unusually sunny for October in Detroit. I woke up early with the first rays of the sun, an old habit I couldn't shake, even on weekends. I had spent the night in DRA's guest room because yesterday's preparations had gone on late into the night, and my daughter had insisted that I stay. Lying in bed, I listened to the quiet house. A difficult day lay ahead, not only because of the exhausting holiday, with lots of strangers, but also because of Lorraine, whose presence promised to be a real test for me. Yesterday's overheard conversation about selling my house wouldn't leave my mind, poisoning every thought. On the nightstand next to my bed lay my gift for Finley, Edward's restored pocket watch. 3 months of painstaking work, searching for parts, cleaning, polishing, tuning. I had put not only my time and skill into it, but also a part of my soul. I hoped that my grandson would appreciate this symbol of the bond between generations. At 7 o'clock in the morning, I went down to the kitchen to make breakfast. But DRA was already there, giving instructions to 2 women from the catering service. Mom, you're up, she said, glancing at me. The coffee's in the pot. Katerina and Jean will take care of breakfast and lunch, so you don't have to cook. I could make Finley's favorite pancakes, I offered. Today is a special day. We've planned a Belgian menu, dear. Sugar-head waffles and fresh berries. Everything's already been ordered. I nodded and stepped back toward the coffee maker. Once again, my help was unnecessary. However, I had long since grown accustomed to this. By 9 o'clock, the house had turned into a battlefield. Decorators were hanging garlands. Florists were arranging compositions. Waiters were setting up buffet tables. Somewhere in the backyard, a small stage was being erected for the DJ DRA had hired. It all looked more like preparations for a society reception than a 13th birthday party. Finley came down to breakfast at 9, still sleepy and somewhat subdued. Happy birthday, dear. I hugged him, feeling him awkwardly hug me back. Thanks, Grandma, he smiled weakly. Finley. DRA rushed into the dining room with her phone in her hand. Finally, you have 40 minutes for breakfast. Then you need to get ready. The photographer will be here at 11:30, and we'll take family pictures before the guests arrive. Okay, Mom, he said obediently, sitting down at the table where a plate of perfectly arranged waffles was already waiting for him. I sat down next to him when DRA left to answer the phone. How are you feeling on such an important day? I asked, trying to sound cheerful. Finley shrugged. I don't know. It's weird, all this. He gestured around the room where strangers were setting up decorations. It's not really what I wanted. What would you like? He thought for a moment. Maybe just go somewhere with a few friends, to a science museum or a robotics exhibition, something like that. I nodded understandingly. It was a familiar story. Dra was making the holiday for herself, not for her son. Just like when my husband Edward had insisted that our daughter study engineering, even though she was drawn to the humanities, now she was repeating the same mistake with her own child. I have something for you, I said quietly, glancing toward the door to make sure Dra wasn't coming back. But I'd like to give it to you before the official part starts. What is it? His eyes lit up with interest. You'll see. I winked at him. Find me before the guests arrive. Finley smiled. The first real smile of the morning. But the moment was quickly interrupted when Dra returned and began reminding him how important it was to make a good impression on the guests, especially his father's colleagues. By 11 o'clock, the house had been completely transformed. Blue and silver balloons, garlands, flower arrangements. Everything looked flawless and sterile, like a picture from an interior design magazine. On the large table in the center of the living room stood a three-tiered cake with a tennis player figurine on top, a tribute to the hobby Gareth had tried to instill in his son. I tried to be helpful, but I constantly felt like I was in the way. When I offered to help with the serving, Dra politely but firmly said that everything had already been arranged by professionals. When I wanted to decorate the table with napkins I had embroidered myself, she explained that they didn't match the color scheme. At 11, when the hustle and bustle was at its peak, Finley found me in a quiet corner of the kitchen. Grandma, did you want to show me something? His voice sounded curious. I took a small box wrapped in plain blue paper out of my pocket. Happy birthday, Finley. This belonged to your grandfather. He carefully unwrapped the gift, and his eyes widened when he saw the antique pocket watch with its open mechanism. Is this a real mechanical watch? He held it reverently, examining the intricate pattern of gears. Yes. I smiled, looking at his delighted face. Your grandfather wore it every day. I restored it for you. You did this yourself? He looked at me. Of course. Remember I told you I used to work with mechanisms? It's the same principle, only in miniature. Finley gently stroked the golden surface of the watch with his finger. It's alive, not like those digital things. Exactly. I nodded. They have a soul and a history. He looked up at me, and there was so much sincere gratitude in his eyes that my heart ached. Thank you, Grandma. This is the best gift ever. We heard Dra's footsteps, and Finley quickly hid the watch in his pocket. There you are. She appeared in the doorway. Finley, the photographer is waiting, and please change into the blue suit we bought you. The guests will start arriving in an hour. When Finley left, Dra turned to me. Mom, can you check if everything is okay with the drinks? I'm worried that we didn't order enough non-alcoholic options for the children. I nodded and went to do as I was asked, even though I knew that everything had already been checked by professionals. Dra just needed something to keep me busy. The first guests began arriving at exactly 1 o'clock. Finley's classmates with their parents, Gareth's colleagues, Dra's friends from the tennis club. Gareth and Dra greeted them at the door while Finley stood nearby, smiling stiffly and shaking hands. I kept to myself, helping the waiters with the appetizers and making sure everyone was comfortable. At 2 o'clock, Lorraine arrived. She entered with that special air of superiority that I remembered from my days at General Motors. Impeccably dressed with perfect hair, she exuded confidence and authority. Gareth lit up when he saw his mother, and Dra visibly tensed. Even after all these years of marriage, she still wanted to impress her mother-in-law. Lorraine gave me a barely perceptible nod as she passed by and headed straight for Finley. My dear grandson, she said, opening her arms wide. 13 is a special age. You're becoming a real man. Finley hugged her, and I noticed his shoulders tense at the formal contact. Thank you, Grandma Lorraine. He smiled politely. I have a special gift for you. She motioned to an assistant who was carrying a small box wrapped in silver paper with the Simmons monogram. Finley opened the gift, and his eyes widened slightly. Inside was an expensive Swiss watch in a leather case. Massive, shiny, more suited to a respectable businessman than a 13-year-old boy. It's a Simmons tradition, Lorraine explained, taking out the watch and putting it on her grandson's wrist. Every man in our family gets a watch like this when he turns 13. Your father wore one just like it. The watch looked bulky on Finley's thin wrist, but he thanked her politely and let Lorraine fasten the strap. Now you're a real Simmons, she said, patting him on the shoulder. I saw Finley's hand involuntarily reach for the pocket where Edward's pocket watch lay. He glanced at me quickly, and I smiled encouragingly. Let him have both gifts, symbols of two different worlds from which he could choose his own path. The celebration continued. The children played games organized by the entertainer while the adults socialized and sipped champagne. Finley moved from group to group, politely accepting congratulations and gifts. I watched him from a distance, noticing how his smile became more and more forced with each passing hour. At 5 o'clock, it was time for the formal dinner. The guests sat down at a long table in the dining room, decorated with flowers and candles. I was seated at the far end next to some distant relative of Gareth's, while Finley took the center seat between his father and Lorraine. Dra sat next to Gareth, radiating the tense happiness of the hostess of a perfect party. The dinner was exquisite, several courses served by waiters in white gloves. I barely touched my food watching Finley. He chatted politely with his neighbors at the table, but his gaze often lingered on me as if seeking support. After dessert, Gareth rose with a glass of champagne. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to propose a toast to our birthday boy. Finley, today you are turning 13, an important milestone on the road to adulthood. You are growing up to be a true Simmons, determined, talented, and a worthy successor to our family tradition. I couldn't help but wince at those words. Gareth seemed completely unaware of his son, his real interests, his inclinations, his soul. Your success in tennis, your grades in school. Everything indicates that you are on the right path. I am proud of you and confident that you will attend a reputable university, just like all the Simmons before you. Here's to you, son. Everyone raised their glasses and drank. Finley sat with a forced smile, his eyes meeting mine across the table for a moment. I gave him an encouraging smile. Then Dra spoke. She talked about how proud she was of her son, about his achievements, about what a wonderful person he was growing up to be. Not a word about his real interests, his talent for technology, his dreams. When Dra finished, it was Lorraine's turn. She rose majestically, holding a glass of champagne. Dear friends, her well-modulated voice filled the room. Today we are celebrating an important event, the 13th birthday of my grandson, Finley Edward Simmons. She placed her hand on the boy's shoulder, and I noticed him tense slightly. 13 is the age when a boy begins to become a man. It is when character, ambitions, and ideas about the future are formed. And I want to say that Finley is growing up to be exactly the kind of person the heir to the Simmons family should be. She paused, glancing around the table, and for a moment her gaze lingered on me. Something cold flashed in her eyes, making me cringe inwardly. I want to thank everyone who made this possible. Gareth and Dra, who are raising their son with such care and attention. The teachers, coaches, mentors who help him grow and develop. Everyone who has been with us all these years. She paused again, and something in her tone made me wary. Except for one woman, Lorraine said quietly, but it rang out in the room like a gunshot, who is trying to drag my grandson back into the past, instilling in him an interest in crafts instead of a real education, to screwdrivers and soldering irons instead of books and sports. A whisper ran through the room. Some of the guests exchanged awkward glances. Dra froze, staring at her plate. Gareth looked slightly surprised but not upset. And Finley stared at me with wide eyes filled with horror and shame. I felt the blood rush to my face. All these years of silence, concessions, compromises, and now in public at my grandson's birthday party, I was being portrayed as the enemy of the family. But that doesn't matter, Lorraine continued with a slight smile. What matters is that Finley knows who his real family is and where his future lies. To you, dear grandson. She raised her glass. Most of the guests followed her example, although some looked embarrassed. I sat motionless, feeling something inside me break completely. The thin thread of respect and acceptance that had held my relationship with my daughter's family together was severed. Dinner continued. The conversation gradually returned to normal. No one mentioned Lorraine's strange toast, although I felt curious glances directed at me. Dra didn't come over to me, didn't stand up for me, didn't say a word in my defense. She just kept smiling and playing the role of the perfect hostess. When the cake was brought out, a three-tiered work of confectionery art with a tennis player on top, everyone gathered around Finley to sing the traditional song. I stood aside, feeling like a ghost at this celebration of life. Finley blew out the candles to applause, and his gaze met mine for a moment. There was so much pain and apology in his eyes that my heart ached. After the cake, the guests began to leave. I mechanically performed my duties as a hostess, collecting plates, helping with gifts, thanking people as they left. But inside, a decision was forming. I could no longer be a shadow in my own family's life. When the last guest left, I went up to the guest room and gathered my few belongings. Then I went downstairs. Dra and Gareth were in the living room talking to Lorraine. Finley was sitting on the sofa, looking at the gifts with a distant expression. I went over to the table in the hall where my keys to my daughter's house were lying. The same keys Dra had given me just in case, but which I had always been reluctant to use, as if I were invading her personal space. The clink of metal against the glass surface of the table made everyone turn around. I stood in the doorway, straight as a board, looking Lorraine straight in the eye for the first time in many years. Judith, what are you doing? Dra frowned, looking at the keys. I'm leaving. My voice sounded calm, though inside I was trembling. Thank you for your hospitality. Don't be silly, Mom. Dra rolled her eyes. It's late. And what? I interrupted my daughter for the first time. Are you afraid your old mother won't make it home? Don't worry, I'll manage. I've managed all my life. Lorraine watched the scene with mild interest, as if it were a television drama. Gareth looked annoyed. I'd probably ruined his plans for a quiet evening. Grandma. Finley got up from the sofa, his voice sounding alarmed. Please stay. It's dark. It's all right, dear. I smiled at him. Happy birthday again. I hope you continue to do what you really enjoy, regardless of what others say. I turned and headed for the door, feeling the eyes of everyone present on me. No one tried to stop me. Even DRA just said, Mom, you're being unreasonable. We'll talk tomorrow when you've calmed down. I didn't answer. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool October evening. The sky was overcast and a light rain was falling. I hadn't brought an umbrella, but right now that seemed insignificant. For the first time in many years I felt free. Humiliated, broken, but free. The rain grew heavier with every step. The fine drops turned into heavy streams, drumming on the asphalt and the roofs of parked cars. I walked with my head down, ignoring my wet clothes. The October cold penetrated to my bones, but inside me burned a fire of humiliation and anger. For 23 years, I had been a shadow in my own family. 23 years of conforming, giving in, keeping quiet, and here was the result. Public humiliation in front of dozens of people, most of whom I didn't even know, and my own daughter said nothing, didn't stand up for me, didn't say a word in my defense. Where did I go wrong? When did DRA turn from a curious little girl, who helped her father assemble radio receivers, into this cold woman, who valued status more than her own mother? Maybe I worked too much when she was little or didn't raise her strictly enough. Or was it because Edward and I always lived modestly, without the luxury she saw in the homes of her wealthy classmates? I walked through the deserted streets of Grosse Pointe, a neighborhood where I never felt at home. It was about 2 kilometers to the bus stop, and then another hour to my old house in the working-class neighborhood. But now that distance seemed insignificant compared to the chasm that had formed between me and my family. The rain washed away the lines on the sidewalk, turning them into gray streams. Lorraine's words echoed in my head with each step I took. Except for one woman. Except for one woman. How dare she? What right did she have to judge me? My relationship with my grandson. My attempts to support his true interests. This was the same Lorraine who had signed my dismissal order 20 years ago, knowing that my husband was ill and my daughter was in college. And now she was trying to erase me again. This time from my grandson's life. I was so lost in my thoughts that I didn't immediately hear the quick footsteps behind me. Only when they were almost upon me did I turn around and freeze in surprise. Finley was running through the rain, soaked to the skin, without a jacket, wearing only the blue suit he had worn to the party. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his eyes, large and serious, looked at me with anxiety and determination. Grandma! He stopped, breathing heavily. Finley! I couldn't believe my eyes. What are you doing here? You're soaking wet. He caught his breath. I left to come find you. But your mom, your birthday. What does it matter? He shrugged. And there was so much adult weariness in that gesture that my heart sank. It's not my holiday. It never was. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. A 13-year-old boy, almost a teenager, stood in front of me in the pouring rain, determined and vulnerable at the same time. You can't just leave like this, I finally said. Your parents will be worried. They don't care, he said, his voice devoid of childish resentment, merely stating a fact. They didn't even notice I left. Mom and Dad were discussing some deal with their guests, and Grandma Lorraine was telling everyone what a wonderful university awaited me in 5 years. The rain intensified, turning into a downpour. We stood under a streetlight, 2 lonely figures in a deserted, expensive neighborhood. We need to find shelter, I said, looking around. You're shaking. A couple of blocks away was an old bus stop with a shelter. I took Finley by the hand and we hurried there, jumping over puddles and huddling close together. Under the thin roof of the bus stop it was a little drier, but at least the rain wasn't hitting us directly in the face. I took off my scarf and tried to wipe my grandson's wet hair with it. Why did you follow me? I asked when we had caught our breath a little. Finley took something out of the pocket of his wet jacket and held it out to me on his open palm. Edward's pocket watch. I gasped, imagining how the water could have damaged the mechanism. I couldn't leave them there, he said quietly. They wouldn't understand how special they are. Finley, Grandma, I can't stay there anymore, he blurted out suddenly. They're always telling me who I'm supposed to be. Tennis, a prestigious school, the right friends, the right hobbies. No one asks what I want. His voice trembled, but not from the cold. What do you want, Finley? He thought for a moment. I want to create things like you, like the grandfather you told me about. I want to understand how things work, not just use them. But when I try to talk to my mom about it, she just sighs and reminds me that I have tennis practice or French class. I nodded, recognizing echoes of my own story in his words. My father didn't understand my interest in mechanics either, considering it an inappropriate pursuit for a girl. It took me years to defend my right to follow my own path. What about your father? I asked. Have you tried talking to him? Dad. Finley shrugged. He's always busy. When he's home, he's usually working in his office or on the phone. And if we do have time together, he spends it talking about the future, the family business, the Simmons traditions. As if I've already decided that I want to be an exact copy of my father and grandfather. The rain drummed on the thin roof of the bus stop, creating a strange feeling of intimacy, as if Finley and I were in our own little world. Grandma. He looked me straight in the eye. What Grandma Lorraine said at the table, that was awful. I saw how much it hurt you, and no one stood up for you, not even Mom. Adult relationships are complicated, Finley, I said, trying to find words that didn't sound like excuses. Sometimes people make choices that are hard for others to understand. That's not right, he said stubbornly. They treat you like a piece of furniture. Like something you can move around or throw away when you don't need it anymore. His insight struck me. This boy saw what many adults chose not to see. You observe a lot, don't you? I asked quietly. When you're a quiet kid, people often forget you're in the room. He smiled faintly. I heard them talking about selling your house as if it were just property, not a place where you live. I felt a lump rise in my throat. All these years, I thought I was protecting Finley by shielding him from the complexities of adult life, but he had seen and understood everything. I'm sorry you had to hear that, I said. Children shouldn't have to worry about things like that. I'm 13, Grandma, he said, straightening up, suddenly looking older than his years. I'm not a little kid, and I see how you're being treated. It's not fair. The rain began to ease, turning into a light drizzle. The night sky shone through the gaps in the clouds, revealing a few stars. What are you going to do now? Finley asked, looking at the wet street. Go home, I shrugged. What else can I do? Can I come with you? There was hope in his voice. Just for tonight? I don't want to go back there. I thought about it. On the one hand, taking a child away without his parents' permission was wrong. On the other hand, sending him back to a home where his true self was being methodically erased seemed even more wrong. Your parents will be worried, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. They didn't even notice I left, Finley repeated. Please, Grandma, just for today. I'll come back tomorrow. I promise. His eyes, so similar to Edward's, looked at me imploringly, and I gave in. All right, but we'll call your parents in the morning and you'll go home. He nodded, and his face lit up. Thank you. I just can't see them all today. Especially Grandma Lorraine with her talk about real Simmonses. We stepped out from under the bus shelter. The rain had almost stopped, but the air was damp and cold. Finley was shivering in his wetsuit. It's a few blocks to the bus stop, I said. You'll freeze before we get there. I'm fine, he said bravely, though his lips were visibly blue. Stay here, I said, looking around and noticing a phone booth on the corner. I'll call a taxi. 15 minutes later, we were sitting in the warm interior of an old Ford. The driver, an elderly man with a gray mustache, gave us a surprised look but said nothing. A wet old woman and a boy in a ruined suit were probably not the strangest passengers he had ever had. On the way, Finley pressed himself against me, shivering from the cold. I put my arms around his shoulders and felt his body gradually relax. We were silent, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside the window, the lights of Detroit flashed by, bright and festive in the center, dim and sparse on the outskirts. I've never been to your house, Finley said suddenly, breaking the silence. It was true. DRA had always insisted that family gatherings be held at their spacious, immaculate home in a prestigious neighborhood. My modest home in an old working-class neighborhood was a symbol of the past she was so eager to distance herself from. It's not as nice as yours, I warned. And a little messy. I wasn't expecting guests. I don't care, he shrugged. I'm sure it's more interesting than our spotless house where you can't even sit on the sofa in the living room because it's not for everyday use. There was such bitterness in his voice that I couldn't help but smile, recognizing my own thoughts. Finley was much more like me than his parents, and that both delighted and frightened me. The taxi stopped in front of my house, a small single-story building with peeling paint and an old but well-kept garden. I paid the driver, mentally calculating how much it would take out of my meager budget. But that didn't matter now. We climbed the steps to the porch and I took out my keys. Real keys to a real house, not the symbolic set I had just left on my daughter's table in the hallway. The door creaked open, letting us into the dark hallway. Wait a second, I said, fumbling for the light switch. A dim light flooded the room, revealing its modest furnishings. Old furniture, a worn carpet and photographs in simple frames on the walls. But it was clean and cozy. A real home, not a showroom. We need to dry off and warm up, I said, helping Finley take off his wet jacket. I have some of your grandfather's old clothes. They'll be a little big, but better than nothing. I led him into the bathroom, gave him a towel, and showed him where everything was. Then I went to find some dry clothes for both of us. In the far corner of the closet, some of Edward's things were still stored, things I hadn't been able to give away after his death. An old sweater, a flannel shirt, and a pair of sweatpants with a tight belt would fit the skinny Finley just fine. When we were both changed and warm, I made some hot tea and sandwiches. We sat in the kitchen, and Finley looked around with interest. You have so many interesting things, he said, looking at the shelves filled with old mechanisms, tools, and books. There's a sense of life here. They're just old things. I shrugged. Most people would call them junk. They're not junk. He shook his head. Everything has a story, right? Like your grandfather's watch. Yes. I smiled, touched by his understanding. Everything means something or reminds you of someone. Finley took the watch out of his pants pocket. It had miraculously survived the rain. Tell me about your grandfather, he asked, carefully placing the watch on the table between us. What was he like? My mother hardly ever talks about him. And I began to tell him about how Edward and I met at the factory where I was a young automation specialist and he was an experienced engineer. About how he supported my ambitions at a time when women were rarely taken seriously in technical professions. About how we built this house together room by room, saving every dollar. About how DRA was born and how Edward taught her to take apart and reassemble radios, hoping she would follow in his footsteps. Finley listened, holding his breath, eagerly absorbing every detail about the family he knew so little about. Why did Mom lose interest in technology? He asked when I paused. You said she loved building radios with Grandpa. I sighed, searching for the right words. In high school, DRA became friends with girls from wealthy families. They lived a completely different life. Expensive cars, travel, fashionable clothes. I think she became ashamed of our simple home, of her father getting his hands dirty with machine oil. She began to dream of a different life, and then she met Gareth in college. She found her ticket to that world. And since then she's been trying to prove that she deserves to be there. Finley finished quietly. I was struck by his insight. Yes, that's probably true. But you know, Finley, I don't blame her. Everyone has the right to choose their own path. It's just that sometimes people forget where they came from and who helped them along the way. We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall and the sound of the rain subsiding outside the window. At that moment, a connection formed between us that was deeper than words. An understanding between two people who saw the world in a similar way despite the difference in age. Grandma, Finley said suddenly, looking at me with serious eyes. I want to stay with you, not just for today. I want to live here with you. His words took me by surprise. Finley, that's impossible. Your parents would never agree. And this is your family. Your home. It's not a home. He shook his head. It's a place where I live, but I've never really felt at home there. Not like I do here with you in just one evening. His words touched me deeply, but I knew I couldn't encourage such thoughts. Listen, you're upset right now. It's been a hard day for all of us. Let's talk about it tomorrow with a clear head. Finley looked disappointed but nodded. Okay, but I won't change my mind. It's late. I glanced at the clock. You need to get some rest. I'll make up the guest room for you. As I made up the bed in the small room that had once belonged to DRA, I thought about Finley's words. Part of me was touched by his desire to stay with me, but another part understood how unrealistic that was. DRA and Gareth would never allow their son to live with his grandmother in an old working-class neighborhood, far from prestigious schools and the right friends. When I returned to the kitchen, Finley was standing at the window, looking out at the wet street, wearing Edward's sweater, which was too big for him. He looked touching and vulnerable. Come on, I called. I'll show you where you'll be sleeping. He turned around, and I saw that he was holding Edward's pocket watch in his hands. It stopped ticking, probably because of the rain. It's okay, I said, walking over and taking the watch. I'll take it apart and dry it out tomorrow. The mechanism shouldn't be damaged. Do you really think you can fix it? There was hope in his voice. Of course, I smiled. I've fixed hundreds of mechanisms more complicated than this in my life. Everything can be fixed if you know how the system works and have the right tools. Finley nodded, and something like admiration flashed in his eyes. Will you teach me? I'd be happy to, I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. Now it's time to sleep. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. After showing Finley to the guest room and making sure he was comfortable, I returned to the kitchen. Sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, I thought about what had happened over the past few hours. About Lorraine's speech, about my departure, about Finley's decision to follow me. I knew I would have to face the consequences in the morning. DRA and Gareth must have discovered their son's disappearance and were probably frantic with worry. I should call them and tell them he was with me and safe. But part of me, the part that still ached from the public humiliation, wanted them to feel at least a fraction of the anxiety and uncertainty I had lived with for the past few years. It was wrong. I knew that. But today, just today, I allowed myself to be less than perfect as a grandmother and a mother. Just for one night. In the morning, I would make the right call. I walked over to the window and looked out at the night street. The rain had stopped, and the street lights and stars reflected in the puddles. Somewhere out there in a wealthy neighborhood in a big house with a perfect lawn, my daughter was probably beginning to understand that not everything in this world can be controlled. That sometimes people, even those closest to us, can make unexpected choices. I returned to the table and picked up Edward's watch. I held it to my ear. Silence. But I knew that the mechanism inside was still alive, just in need of care and attention, just like our family. I carefully placed the watch on the table and went to my bedroom. Tomorrow would be a new day, and perhaps the beginning of something new in our relationship. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a voice and a choice, and a little boy who understood me better than anyone else. Morning came too quickly. I woke up to the sound of rain drumming on the roof, normal for Detroit at this time of year. I lay there for the first few seconds, staring at the ceiling and gathering my thoughts. The events of the previous day seemed unreal, like a bad dream, but they were real. Lorraine with her insulting toast, me leaving the party, and Finley coming after me in the pouring rain. Finley. I sat up abruptly in bed. My grandson was asleep in the next room, and his parents were probably going crazy with worry. Or maybe they hadn't noticed he was missing yet. No, that was impossible. No matter how absorbed Dra and Gareth were in their own affairs, they couldn't have failed to notice that their son hadn't come home. I looked at the clock. It was 7 o'clock in the morning. It was time to call my daughter. I took out my phone and froze with my finger over the buttons. What would I say? Hi dear. Your son is with me. Don't worry. After I left the party and left the keys behind, after I took a 13-year-old child away without his parents' permission, the phone rang before I could dial the number. Of course it was Dra. I took a deep breath and answered. Mom. My daughter's voice sounded tense. Is Finley with you? Yes. I didn't see any point in denying the obvious. He came to pick me up last night. He got soaked in the rain. I couldn't send him back in that state. And you didn't think to call? Her voice was boiling with rage. We've been freaking out all night. Gareth drove around the whole neighborhood. We called his friends, the police. I was going to call in the morning, I replied, trying to sound calm. Finley was upset. He needed some time. Upset. Dra raised her voice. What did you say to him? He's never run away from home before. I didn't say anything to him, I said, starting to get angry myself. Maybe you should ask yourself why your son chose to leave a party and go after his inappropriate grandmother. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Dra spoke more calmly. We're on our way. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up without waiting for a reply. I sighed and went to wake Finley. He was sleeping curled up under the covers and looked much younger than his 13 years. I felt bad waking him, but I had to get him ready for his parents' arrival. Finley, I said gently, shaking his shoulder. Wake up, dear. Your parents will be here soon. He opened his eyes and stared at me blankly for a few seconds. Then yesterday's events must have come back to him, and he sat up in bed. Did they call? He asked in a sleepy voice. Yes, just now. Your mother was very worried. I doubt it, he shrugged. She was probably angry that I ruined her perfect holiday. Finley, don't be like that, I said, sitting down next to him. She's your mother. Of course she was worried. He looked at me doubtfully but said nothing. I suggested he wash up and have breakfast while there was still time. His clothes, dry from the night, lay neatly folded on a chair. We ate toast and tea in silence when we heard the sound of a car pulling up. Finley tensed and I put my hand on his shoulder. Everything will be fine. Just be honest, okay? He nodded, but I could see the anxiety in his eyes. The doorbell rang sharply, insistently. I went to open the door, preparing myself for an unpleasant conversation. Dra and Gareth were standing on the doorstep. My daughter looked exhausted. Her face was pale, her eyes red, her hair disheveled. Gareth, on the other hand, seemed composed and determined, only the muscles in his jaw betraying his tension. Where is he? Dra asked without greeting me. In the kitchen having breakfast, I said, stepping aside to let them in. They walked past me without saying a word. I followed them into the kitchen where Finley was still sitting at the table, straight as a string. Finley Edward Simmons. Dra's voice trembled. What do you think you're doing? The boy looked up at his mother. Hi, Mom. Hi, Mom, she exclaimed, throwing her hands up. You disappeared on your own birthday without saying a word. Do you have any idea what we went through? We called the police, the hospitals. I left a note, Finley said quietly. On your bed. Dra fell silent, digesting this information. We didn't go into your room, she finally said. We thought you were somewhere in the house or the garden, and when we realized you weren't there. When did you realize that? Finley asked, his voice challenging. An hour? 2. It doesn't matter, Gareth interrupted. What matters is that you left without permission with a grandmother, who didn't even bother to call us. Don't bring Grandma into this, Finley said suddenly, raising his voice. It was my decision. I couldn't stay there any longer. Not after what Grandma Lorraine did. Dra shot me an accusing look. What did you tell him? She didn't say anything to me. Finley stood up from the table. I saw everything myself. How Grandma Lorraine humiliated her in front of all the guests. How you sat there and said nothing. How no one stood up for her. A heavy silence fell over the room. DRA lowered her eyes, unable to find the words. Gareth shifted from foot to foot, clearly feeling uncomfortable. Finley, you don't understand adult relationships, he finally said. Between DRA's mother and my mother, it's a complicated story. I understand enough, the boy said stubbornly. I understand when someone is treated unfairly, and I don't want to be a part of it. Enough. DRA shook her head. We'll discuss this at home. Get ready. We're leaving. I'm not going. Finley crossed his arms over his chest. I want to stay with Grandma. Don't be silly. Gareth stepped forward. Your place is at home with us. You have school practice. I don't care. Finley's voice trembled. I hate tennis. I hate the school where all anyone talks about is money and status. I hate being a real Simmons. Gareth looked as if he had been struck. DRA paled even more. Finley, please. She reached out to her son. You're upset. I understand, but this isn't the answer. Let's go home and we'll talk about it. There's nothing to talk about. He pulled away from her hand. You never really listen to me. All you care about is what you want. I stood to the side watching the scene unfold with a heavy heart. I didn't want to be the cause of discord between Finley and his parents, but at the same time I understood his feelings. Finley, I interjected gently, maybe you should listen to your parents. They were worried about you. He looked at me with disappointment. You too, Grandma? I thought you would understand. I do understand, I said, walking over to him and putting my hand on his shoulder. But your place is with them right now. They're your parents and they love you, even if they don't always show it the way you'd like them to. DRA looked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting my support. Fine, Finley finally said. I'll go home, but if nothing changes, I'll leave again and next time you won't find me. Finley, DRA exclaimed. I'm serious, Mom. He looked her straight in the eye. I can't live like this anymore. I'm 13 years old, but I feel like a prisoner in my own home. The tension in the room reached a peak. Gareth looked angry. DRA looked shaken, and Finley looked determined despite his young age. I think we all need to calm down, I said, trying to diffuse the situation. Finley, go get your things. Your parents and I need to talk. The boy hesitated, but then nodded and left the kitchen. As soon as his footsteps faded in the hallway, DRA turned to me. How could you, Mom, take a child without our permission? Do you realize that could be considered kidnapping? I didn't take him. I shook my head. He came to me, soaking wet and upset. What was I supposed to do? Send him back out in the rain? You should have called. DRA snapped right away. Yes, I should have. I admitted my mistake. And I'm sorry I didn't. But I'm also sorry about what happened at the party, about your mother-in-law publicly insulting me, and you not saying a word in my defense. DRA looked away. That was inappropriate of her. But you know Lorraine, she's always very direct. Direct? I couldn't believe my ears. Diarra, she humiliated me in front of all your guests. She basically accused me of being a bad influence on Finley because I encourage his interest in technology. Isn't that true? Gareth interjected. You encourage him to do all these crafts when he should be focusing on his studies and sports. Crafts. I looked at my son-in-law in confusion. Finley builds electronic devices, programs, studies mechanics. These aren't crafts. These are things he has a real talent for. He also has a talent for tennis, Gareth said stubbornly, and languages and math, areas that will really help him in the future. And technical creativity won't help him? I shook my head. Look around you, Gareth. We live in a world created by engineers and inventors, people who took apart radios and built robots when they were kids. That's not the point, DRA interjected again. The point is that you're encouraging him to secretly do things we don't approve of. You're undermining our authority, and you're suppressing his personality. I couldn't hold back any longer. You don't see who he really is because you're too busy creating the perfect heir to the Simmons family. Gareth clenched his fists. You have no right to judge how we raise our son. I do when I see that he's unhappy. I met his gaze without fear. When he's ready to run away from home just to be listened to and understood. A tense silence fell. I could see DRA struggling with herself, her face shifting between anger, hurt, and doubt. In any case, she finally said, this is our family and our decisions. You can't just take Finley away whenever you feel like it. I'm not going to, I replied. But maybe you should think about why he chose to come with me. Gareth opened his mouth to reply. But at that moment, Finley returned to the kitchen with his backpack in his hands. I'm ready, he said quietly. Okay, DRA smiled tensely. Let's go home. Dad will make your favorite pancakes for breakfast. I don't want pancakes. Finley shook his head. I need you to listen to me. Really. Listen. DRA and Gareth exchanged glances, not knowing what to say. Grandma. Finley turned to me. Can I come over after school? You promised to show me how to fix Grandpa's watch. I looked at DRA, waiting for her reaction. She pursed her lips but nodded. I think we can arrange that if you do your homework first. Thanks. Finley hugged me. I'll be there soon. I promise. As they were heading for the door, I suddenly remembered. De'Ara, can I talk to you alone? Just for a minute. She hesitated, then nodded. Gareth, wait with Finley in the car. I'll be right there. When we were alone, I took a deep breath. What I was about to say had been on my mind for a long time. De'Ara, I know about your plans to sell my house, I said bluntly. I overheard your conversation with Lorraine. She paled. Mom, it was just a discussion. We haven't decided anything. Listen to me. I interrupted her. This house is technically yours. That's true, but that's only because your father wanted to secure your future. He never imagined you would kick me out of here. No one is going to kick you out, De'Ara protested. We just thought that at your age it would be better. At my age? I smiled bitterly. I'm 63, dear, not 93. I'm completely independent and intend to remain so for many years to come. She lowered her eyes. Mom, you have to understand, this neighborhood is becoming less and less safe, and the house needs constant repairs. I can manage, I said firmly, and I will continue to manage. But there's something you don't know. I walked over to the sideboard and took out a folder containing documents I had kept for many years. Remember 3 years ago when Gareth lost his job because of a company merger? When you almost lost your house because of an unpaid mortgage? De'Ara frowned. What does that have to do with anything? We got through it. Gareth got a new job. But it took almost 6 months, I said, opening the folder and taking out a document. During that time you had to make 3 mortgage payments, each for $5,000. Remember how strangely quickly the bank agreed to restructure the loan? How suddenly they became so understanding. What are you trying to say? De'Ara's voice sounded anxious. I paid, I said, handing her the receipts. All $15,000. My retirement savings. De'Ara took the documents with trembling hands. But how? Why didn't you say anything? Because I knew Gareth wouldn't accept help from me, I shrugged. His pride wouldn't allow it. And you? You would have put his feelings above the safety of your family. So I made a deal with the bank directly. Mom. De'Ara stared at me with wide eyes. I didn't know. Of course you didn't. I took the receipts and put them back in the folder. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying this so you understand. I've always done everything I could for you and your family, and I'll continue to do so. But I won't let them evict me from my own home and send me to a nursing home like some useless thing. De'Ara stood there, shaken, unable to find the words. I could see different emotions fighting in her eyes. Surprise, shame, gratitude, confusion. I need to think, she finally said. This is too much to take in. Of course, I nodded. Think about it and talk to your son. Really talk to him. Listen to him. He's a wonderful boy, dear. And he's so much like your father, even though you may not see it. She nodded, still unable to meet my gaze. I'll try. And thank you for not sending him back out in the rain. He's my grandson, I said simply. And your son. We both want what's best for him. We just see it differently. De'Ara finally looked up. Maybe you're right. We have a lot to talk about, all of us. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. And dear, Finley was serious about leaving again if nothing changed. Don't underestimate his determination. He takes after Edward in that way too. I know, she replied quietly. I saw it in his eyes. When the door closed behind her, I sank into a chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. The last day had drained all my strength, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth I had kept inside me for so long had finally been spoken, and maybe something was starting to change in our family. I walked over to the window and saw De'Ara getting into the car. Finley was sitting in the back seat, looking in my direction. I waved at him and he waved back, smiling faintly. Something about that smile, that simple gesture, gave me hope. The car drove away, and I was left alone in the quiet house, full of memories. But now the silence didn't seem so oppressive. Maybe soon there would be a young voice asking questions about mechanisms and electronics again. Maybe we really could fix not only Edward's old clock, but our relationship as well. November in Detroit was unusually cold. A damp wind from Lake Michigan chilled passersby to the bone, forcing them to wrap themselves in scarves and coats. 3 weeks had passed since Finley left with me on his birthday. 3 weeks of gradual but noticeable changes. The first few days after our conversation with De'Ara were filled with awkward silence. She called dryly and formally, letting me know when Finley could come over and clearly stating when he needed to be sent home. I didn't press the issue, understanding that she needed time to process everything that had happened. Finley came 3 times a week after school. We spent hours in the garage working on Edward's clock. I showed him how to take the mechanism apart, clean each part, and oil the gears. He turned out to be a capable student, attentive, careful, with a natural understanding of the principles of mechanics. "Grandma, look!" he exclaimed one day when we managed to get the pendulum swinging again. "It's alive." His eyes burned with the same fire I had once seen in Edward's when he managed to fix something complicated. It wasn't just pride in a job well done, but genuine joy at coming into contact with a marvel of engineering. On the third Thursday in November, as we were finishing work on the clock, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. First, I didn't think much of it. The weather was changing and my age was starting to show. But by evening, the pain intensified, radiating to my left arm and jaw. "Grandma, you look pale," Finley remarked. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired." I tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Maybe I should lie down for a minute." I got up from the chair and immediately staggered. The room spun around me, and the pain in my chest became unbearable. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was Finley's frightened face and his cry, "Grandma!" I woke up in the hospital. A white ceiling, the beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic. I tried to move, but my body felt foreign and unresponsive. "Mom!" Diarrhea's voice sounded somewhere nearby. "Are you awake?" "Thank God." I turned my head and saw my daughter sitting in a chair by the bed. She looked exhausted. Red eyes, pale face, disheveled hair. "What happened?" My voice sounded hoarse and weak. "You had a heart attack." DRA took my hand. "Quite a serious one." If it weren't for Finley, he reacted so quickly. He called an ambulance and called us. "The doctors say he saved your life." I tried to comprehend what I had heard. A heart attack. At 63. Just like Edward once, only he couldn't be saved. "How long have I been here?" 2 days, dear." DRA squeezed my hand. "You were unconscious. The doctors, they were worried, but now everything should be fine. You had surgery and a stent put in." I nodded, trying to collect my thoughts. "Finley, is he okay?" This must have scared him. "He's fine, dear." DRA smiled weakly. "He sat here the whole time until we sent him home to sleep. He's very attached to you, Mom." There was no usual irritation in her voice, only fatigue and something else. Perhaps realization. "I'm sorry I made you worry," I said, trying to sit up higher on the pillows. "Don't be silly, dear." DRA helped me get more comfortable. "It's not your fault. I should be the one apologizing." I looked at her in surprise. DRA rarely admitted her mistakes and even more rarely apologized for them. "For what?" She lowered her eyes. "For everything. For not standing up for you at Finley's birthday party. For letting Garrett's mother humiliate you all these years. For not appreciating everything you did for us. For trying to sell your house without asking you." Her voice trembled and I saw tears rolling down her cheeks. My proud, always composed daughter was crying without holding back her tears. "When the doctor said you might not make it, I suddenly realized how much I hadn't told you." She continued. "How many years were lost because of my stupid pride and desire to live up to other people's expectations." "Diarra," I reached out and touched her face. "I always knew you loved me, even when we didn't understand each other. But I behaved terribly." She shook her head. "I became what I always feared I would become. A cold, calculating woman who values status more than family. You just wanted the best for your son." I tried to comfort her like all mothers do, but I didn't see what was really best for him. DRA smiled bitterly. I didn't notice how unhappy he was trying to live up to our expectations. It took him running away from home, and you ending up in the hospital for me to finally see the light. We talked for a long time. For the first time in years, we really talked openly and honestly about her childhood, about Edward's death, about her desire to escape the working class, about my disappointment when she turned her back on everything we had taught her, about Finley and his talents, about Gareth and his family, about plans for the future. "I talked to Gareth about the house," Diarra said as our conversation drew to a close. "We've decided not to sell it. It's your house, Mom, and it will always be yours unless you decide otherwise." I felt a heavy weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you, dear. That means a lot to me. And one more thing," she hesitated. "Finley wants to join a robotics club. Gareth and I have decided to support him, and maybe you could go with him sometimes. Share your experience." I couldn't believe my ears. "Of course I'd love to, but what would Lorraine say?" DRA sighed. "Lorraine will have to accept it. Gareth, he's been rethinking a lot of things over the last few days. He saw how worried Finley was about you, how he wouldn't leave your bedside. It made him think about family values, about what's really important." There was a soft knock at the door, and Finley appeared in the doorway. Seeing that I was awake, he rushed to the bed. "Grandma, you're awake." I smiled, feeling my heart warm with his sincere joy. "Thanks to you, as I heard. You're my hero, Finley." He blushed. "I just did what had to be done. I called an ambulance like you taught me to do in case of an emergency and saved my life." I took his hand. "Thank you. I was so scared," he admitted quietly. "When you fell, I thought." "It's okay," I reassured him. "I'm fine. And I'll be even better once we finish your grandfather's watch." His face lit up. "I've almost finished cleaning it just like you showed me. It'll be working again soon." A week later, I was discharged from the hospital. Gareth came to pick me up himself and was unusually attentive and caring. A specially prepared room was waiting for me on the ground floor of my daughter's house, so that I wouldn't have to climb the stairs. The first few days were difficult. I felt weak, tired quickly, and my heart sometimes made itself known with unfamiliar sensations, but gradually it became easier. I started helping with simple household chores, cooking Finley's favorite meals, and spending time with him, reading books and looking at drawings. One evening, as my grandson and I were sitting in the living room, working on a new project, an automatic watering system for houseplants, Gareth walked into the room. He stopped in the doorway, watching us with an unfamiliar expression on his face. "What are you doing?" he asked, coming closer. Finley tensed, ready to defend our activity, but Gareth smiled. "That looks interesting. Can I take a look?" Finley and I exchanged glances, surprised by this turn of events. Gareth had never shown any interest in his son's technical projects before. "Sure, Dad," Finley said, moving over to make room on the couch. "We're designing a system that will automatically water Mom's flowers when the soil gets too dry. How does it work?" Gareth sat down next to them, looking at the diagram with genuine curiosity. Finley began to explain how the moisture sensors and microcontroller worked. And I was surprised to see that Gareth was actually listening. He wasn't just pretending. He was asking questions, getting involved, and offering ideas. "You know," he said when Finley finished his explanation, "when I was about your age, I was also interested in electronics." "Really?" Finley couldn't hide his surprise. "Yes." Gareth smiled at the memory. "I used to build radios from parts one found at the dump." My mother was horrified. She thought it was an inappropriate pastime for a boy from a good family. "Grandma Lorraine," Finley raised his eyebrows. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" Gareth sighed. "Probably because at some point I believed her. I believed that I had to live up to a certain image, and I decided that my childhood hobbies were just a whim. But looking at you, at your passion, I'm starting to think that maybe I gave up something I really loved." Gareth's candor was a turning point. From that evening on, he began to spend more time with his son, taking an interest in his projects and even helping with some technical solutions. They found a common language that had been hidden for many years under a layer of expectations and conventions. DRA also changed. She became softer, more tolerant, and began to listen to her son's wishes, not just her mother-in-law's advice. We often talked in the evenings, reminiscing about the past, discussing the present, and planning for the future. Slowly but surely, the connection that I had long considered lost was being restored. 2 weeks after I was discharged, something happened that I had both feared and anticipated: Lorraine's visit. She arrived unannounced, elegant as always, with her hair perfectly styled and wearing an expensive suit. "Judith," she nodded at me with cool politeness. "I'm glad to see you're better." "Thank you, Lorraine," I replied just as reservedly. We sat in the living room, me, DRA, and Lorraine. Gareth was at work, and Finley hadn't come home from school yet. The tension in the room was palpable. "I hear you've given up on selling the house, Judith," Lorraine finally said, turning to DRA. "And that Finley is now into some kind of technology." "Yes, Mom," DRA replied calmly. "We decided it was the right thing to do. The house means a lot to Mom, and robotics is Finley's real passion." Lorraine pursed her lips. "I'm afraid you're making a mistake, dear. Technical hobbies won't lead a boy to the success a member of the Simmons family deserves. And as for the house, that's an emotional decision, not a rational one." "Perhaps." DRA met her mother-in-law's gaze without fear. "But it's our decision, mine, Gareth's, and Finley's. We are a family, and we have decided that happiness and genuine relationships are more important to us than living up to someone else's expectations." Lorraine looked as if she had been struck. She was clearly not used to resistance, especially from a daughter-in-law who had spent years trying to earn her approval. "Does Gareth know about this?" she asked after a pause. "Of course," DRA nodded. "It was our decision. In fact, he's helping Finley with his new project, a robot for the school fair." Lorraine shifted her gaze to me, and I saw a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect in her eyes. "I see you got what you wanted, Judith. You won them over to your side." "I didn't win anyone over, Lorraine." I met her gaze calmly. "I just loved my family the way they are, not the way someone else thinks they should be." At that moment, the front door opened, and Finley burst into the house, excited and happy. "Mom, Grandma, I made the city robotics team. We're going to compete in the national competition." He froze when he saw Lorraine, and his enthusiasm faded a little. "Hello, Grandma Lorraine." "Hello, Finley." She smiled stiffly. "Congratulations on your success." "Thanks," he said, looking from one face to the other, feeling the tension in the room. "I think I'll go change." "Wait." DRA stood up and hugged her son. "That's wonderful news. We have to celebrate. How about inviting everyone over for dinner, including Grandma Judith and Grandma Lorraine?" I couldn't hide my surprise. DRA was suggesting a family dinner with both grandmothers at the same table. "Great idea." Finley chimed in unexpectedly. "Dad's coming home early today. We can order pizza, or I can help Grandma Judith make her famous spaghetti and meatballs." Lorraine looked as if she had been invited to her own funeral, but she couldn't refuse in front of her grandson. "I'd love to join you," she finally said. The evening promised to be interesting. Dinner went better than I expected. The spaghetti we made with Finley turned out delicious. When Gareth came home from work and heard about his son's achievement, he was genuinely proud. He told us about his own youthful experiments with electronics, which clearly shocked his mother. "You never told me you used to build radios," Lorraine said, looking offended. "You never asked, Mom," Gareth replied simply. "You always knew exactly what I should be interested in. So there was no point in telling you about things that didn't fit into your plans." Lorraine was silent, digesting his words. For the first time I saw an expression of uncertainty, even vulnerability on her face. After dinner, while Finley showed his father his drawings and DRA made coffee, Lorraine and I were left alone in the living room. "You know," she said suddenly, looking at the family photos on the wall, "I've always done what I thought was best for my family, for Gareth, for Finley." "Me too," I replied. "We're alike in that way. Strange as it may sound." She looked at me in surprise. "Maybe, but your approach seems to work better. They seem happy, real, because they can be themselves." I shrugged. "Without having to live up to anyone else's expectations." Lorraine nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe there's something to that, although it's hard for me to imagine any other way than the one I've been on my whole life. It's never too late to try." I smiled. "You can start small. For example, ask your grandson what really interests him." She paused, then nodded. "I'll think about it." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an admission of mistakes, but it was a small step toward understanding, toward the possibility of building a relationship on a new foundation. By December, I had fully recovered and returned to my home. But now it wasn't as lonely as it used to be. Finley came by regularly, not only to work on technical projects but also just to talk, listen to stories about his grandfather, and share his thoughts and plans. Sometimes Gareth would come with him, and the three of us would spend evenings repairing old mechanisms or designing new devices. DRA also came by more often, helping with cleaning, bringing groceries, or just sitting with me over a cup of tea. We were rebuilding our lost connection, learning to get to know each other again. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we disagreed, but now there was mutual respect between us, which had been missing for so long. On Christmas Eve, Finley brought me a small box neatly wrapped in blue paper. "This is for you, Grandma," he said shyly. "I wanted to give it to you earlier, but it wasn't ready." I opened the box and froze in amazement. Inside was a miniature mechanical alarm clock, a true work of art. The brass case was polished to a shine, and behind the glass I could see a complex mechanism with tiny gears and springs. But the most amazing thing was the dial. It was engraved with our family silhouettes. Of me, DRA, Gareth, and Finley himself, connected by thin lines like a constellation. "Finley," I couldn't find the words. "It's beautiful. Did you make it yourself?" "Dad and I have been working on it for the last few weeks," he smiled. "I designed the mechanism inspired by Grandpa's watch, and Dad helped me with the engraving. It's not just an alarm clock. It's programmed to ring on dates that are special to our family." I carefully wound the mechanism, and the alarm clock came to life in my hands. A quiet, steady ticking, the hands moving across the dial. Time that now united our family. "It's beautiful." I hugged my grandson. "Thank you, Finley. It's the best gift I've ever received. Now you have something to remind you of all of us," he said, looking at the alarm clock. "Of our family, which is whole again." That evening we all gathered together. Me, DRA, Gareth, Finley, and to my surprise, Lorraine. Not a perfect family from a glossy magazine, but real people with their strengths and weaknesses, their history and their scars. But for the first time in a long time, we were honest with each other and accepted each other for who we were. When Finley proposed a toast to family, I looked at Edward's pocket watch, now worn by his grandson, and at the alarm clock he had given him, standing on the mantelpiece. Two mechanisms measuring time in their own way, but linked by a common history, common efforts, and love. Like our family, for many years it lacked sincerity, acceptance, and true love. But now the mechanism had been restored. All the parts were in place and time was running correctly again. I raised my glass with everyone else, feeling a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with a heart attack. It was a feeling of home, of belonging, of love. The clock of my life was ticking again, measuring not just days and hours, but moments of true happiness.